Hey, welcome to Dev Radio. This is our series on CI/CD with GitHub Actions. We'll be using mostly JavaScript examples for this series. If you like .NET and Azure Pipelines, we've got another series for you this month too. But today it's JavaScript and GitHub Actions. Sydney, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much, man.
Hey, thank you again for the wonderful introduction, Matt. Hey, everyone. Matt did perfect example of laying it all out. We are going to dive in a three-part series into using JavaScript to using GitHub Actions to build, integrate, deploy our JavaScript code. It's a wonderful series where we're going to walk through building YAML pipelines and workflows using GitHub Actions to take JavaScript code, specifically Node code, and do continuous integration, continuous deployment to Azure so that we can take our applications and build them in intelligent ways and implement things such as automatic testing, automatic deployment, containerization, all sorts of wonderful things. Today is the first part in the three-part series, and what I like to always do in the first part is to go over all the basics and fundamental stuff that you need to do so that you can be successful in the rest of the series. So today is again part one of three parts in this series, Introduction to GitHub Actions. I'm going to be sharing lots of hyperlinks today. They're going to all be in the description box here on YouTube. The idea here is that it's a live series, so I'm going to try my best to look at the chat box and answer questions when I can, but sometimes I might miss them, so I'm going to just try and go in and maybe answer some later. But the idea here is I'm going to go through the basics of building a pipeline using this YAML syntax. Building workflow, excuse me, using the YAML syntax to do a very basic build of a node project, doing a simple level set so that we can use this knowledge when we get into parts 2 and 3, where we're doing a continuous integration workflow or a continuous deployment workflow. So real quick about me, Sydney Andrews. I'm a Microsoft Azure MVP. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I'm going to be going over a lot of stuff. So again, I'm going to just try to keep an eye on the chat. If you got any questions throughout this series, again, I'm going to try to answer in the chat. But let's say I miss a question, you don't like my answer, you say, you know what, that answer Sydney gave was bad. Or maybe I have a really difficult question needs a really difficult answer. msusdev at Microsoft.com. Once again, that's msusdev at Microsoft.com. That's our email alias. Shoot us some of your most challenging questions. We're going to try and see if we get you connected with somebody who can give you a really good answer. We also have a GitHub repository. Every slide you see, every demo you see throughout this entire series is going to be here on GitHub. We are trying to be really slick, so we're not revealing the future demos on the GitHub repo. So I'm trying to do some really cool things with staging so I don't leak what's coming up in future sessions. So, but everything you see today is on the GitHub repo already. So that way, if you see something on this video, you say, oh, that's really cool. Where can I find the source code? GitHub.com, msusdev, end-to-end CI/CD. It's up on GitHub. You can go pull down the source code. All right. So three-part series. We're on part one, Introduction to GitHub Actions. There's two more parts after this. Everything we learned today is the fundamentals. We're really just going to focus on, hey, I've never written a workflow using YAML, or maybe I have, but I really don't understand the nuts and bolts of it. I've copy and pasted it, but I don't understand what each individual component means. I don't understand why we use this keyword, why we use that keyword. So today we're going to just go incrementally, line by line, build out a workflow and just parse it and try to figure out what works. And we're just going to do a really simple hello world app in Node and just build up just a really, really quick basic CI workflow. That's going to take up all of our time today, but that's going to give us the base level understanding. So when we go into session 2, where we build out a more sophisticated CI pipeline for maybe a complex command line application, command line interface for maybe an npm package, we can always go back to this first session in case we get stuck somewhere or we don't understand something in the workflow. Or maybe if we're building out maybe a Next.js or React web application and we're confused about, maybe we're trying to build a job out or we have a step but we don't really understand the syntax, we can always fall back to what we learned here in the first session. So sessions 2 and 3 really build upon everything we're doing today. So today is all about level setting. If you've done this before, you may see some stuff. You say, oh, I already know that. But you may also see some other stuff and say, hey, I've done this before, but I've never really understood why that syntax was the way it was. So 3 things we're going to try to do today. I'm going to try to explain what GitHub Actions are at a high level. I'm going to try explaining the YAML syntax as best I can. And we're going to try to build a sample project. So, let's really just dive in. So GitHub Actions, in and of themselves, they are packaged workflows. They automate the most common build, test, and deployment actions that we try to do here for our projects. They're highly configurable. They're extendable. They support a marketplace of different actions and tools. Now, many of them are free. If you can create a GitHub repo, you can create an action within GitHub Actions. You can even sell actions. If you have a really sophisticated action, you can put it on the marketplace and sell it as a paid product. But the really cool thing about GitHub Actions is if you build workflows, they're integrated into the GitHub interface in a really rich way that gives you a lot of information within the user interface. I'm going to show you a lot of that today. So as a developer, you heard me use the term workflow a couple of times. Well, what is a workflow? Well, workflow is really just an array of jobs, and each this array of jobs has individual, different jobs, and each of these jobs have steps. Now, job, think of it like an individual thing you're trying to do, and steps, think of them as individual steps within that job. And it's a little tricky to visualize. So I like to give you a little visualization of that. So I used the example earlier. Let's say I'm creating a tool for NPM. I want to build a tool that if I put in a word, it gives me the native phonetic spelling. Well, if I'm building that tool for NPM, there may be 2 tasks I'm trying to accomplish. The first one is I'm trying to package that tool in a way that NPM understands. So in order to package that tool, maybe I'm going to NPM and I'm installing any packages, dependent packages I need for NPM. And then I'm using the NPM pack command to create an NPM compliant package. And then the second task I may need to perform will have 2 more steps. That might be actually logging into NPM and publishing that package to NPM. So within one workflow, I have now performed 2 individual jobs with individual steps. And, that boundary or threshold of what you define as jobs and steps is really dependent upon how you want to organize it as an organization or as a team or as a group. That just largely depends on how you want to structure things. So let's actually try and configure a workflow to check our build environment, because I think that's the easiest way for us to build our very first workflow file. So this is going to require us to do some really basic GitHub stuff. So if you never worked with GitHub before, I'm just not going to assume anything. We're going to do some really, really elementary stuff here. So I'm going to just show you my environment. I have Visual Studio Code open into an empty folder called dev. Here it is in Windows Explorer, just an empty folder called dev in my downloads folder. I have it open in Visual Studio Code, again, an empty folder called dev. I also have it open in Windows Terminal, again, an empty folder called dev. And I am going to go to a GitHub organization I have here called msusdev examples. It's just a wonderful organization I created just for example code. I'm going to create a new repo, and I'm going to call this repo February 24th. And I'm just going to make it a public repo, hit create repository. and it says, okay, create a repository in your local machine and you can push it here. Easy peasy. So I'm going to go back to my local machine. I have this empty folder. Now, Visual Studio Code will allow me to initialize a brand new repository on my local machine by just clicking this button. I can also do the same thing for the command line by just typing in git init. That'll do the same thing. Initializes a repository. And if I go back to Visual Studio Code, you'll see that that button has disappeared because now I have a repository on my local machine. I can go in and do some very basic things. I have an empty GitHub repository or empty Git repository on my local machine. I can create a workflow file. So I'm going to do just that. The the way we create a workflow file is we create a folder called .github. Within that folder, we create another folder called workflows. And then this is the interesting part. The file within the workflows folder, the name of that file isn't really important. That's really up to me what I want to name it. I'm going to call my file today build, just as long as it's called .yaml at the end. That's what's important. Now, I'm going to create a workflow file, and the first thing I'm going to specify is when this workflow should run. And see, this is when I first start configuring things. So I want to, I don't know, I'm going to leave it empty. I'm going to just leave this file empty and see what happens. It's going to say step A, commit this file. And so I have this local repository, but it doesn't have a remote. So if I go into Visual Studio Code and I say remote, I can add a remote and it says, okay, give me the URL of your remote repository. I go back to GitHub and it says, hey, here's the URL for the remote repository. Go ahead and copy that, paste that in Visual Studio Code. It says, what do you want to name your remote repository? What you normally would do is you would name it origin. Then I'm going to publish this main branch to remote origin. And since I haven't logged in, it's going to prompt me to log in. See the nice little login screen. Since I already have my browser open, I don't actually need to log in. I can just hit sign in with your browser. It's going to pop my browser open. And since I'm already logged in, that was pretty neat. Everything's good to go. It set my branch up. If I go to GitHub and refresh, I now have pushed everything up. Now, watch this. If I go to actions, I'll see that it's ran my workflow. Now, it's failed. I didn't put anything in the workflow file. I kind of expected it to fail. Let's go see why it failed. I go in. It says, hey, I need an event trigger. So I need a keyword called own, and I need to define an event trigger. Okay. And I'm lucky. I've worked with workflows before. So I need to put in a keyword own, and I need to define it when we should trigger this workflow. So I know some event triggers, and I'll come to this in a slide in a second. But I know one of the event triggers is when we push a commit to the repository. So I'll say own push. I'll save this change to my workflow, type in step B as my commit message, and I'll push version B of my workflow. All right. We'll go up to GitHub, check it out, see what happens. Okay. It failed again. We'll jump in. It says, okay, that worked. But now it says you need a list of jobs. Remember that diagram we looked at? It says I need a list of jobs. So I'll just jump back in. Okay, I need an array of jobs. Now let's look at that error message one more time. It says I need jobs defined in that array of jobs. So just putting an array of jobs here is not going to be sufficient. Matter of fact, if I save this and put in step C, I'm going to get that same error message again. Just to show you in step C, sync it up and send it. Good enough. Push it to production, right? Just go back here, go to actions. You'll see it failed again. Invalid workflow. No jobs defined in that array of jobs. Going to go back here. So I need to define a job. With YAML, we can just space over 2. Here I can name my job whatever I want. So I'll just call this first hyphen job. Save. So I have one job in my array of jobs. So I'm now on step D, but I'm showing you iteratively, I'm learning by reading these error messages how to build my workflow. So sync my changes up. Let's see if I have enough for my first workflow. But just jump back into actions. Still missing some stuff, right? Go into step D. We'll see. Okay. Remember from our diagram, our jobs have to have steps. Well, we have a job defined, but we don't have any steps defined in an array of steps. So we'll go in and we'll say, our jobs need an array of steps and it needs a step. Now, I can keep going on and on and on. I think you get the point at this point. So I'm going to help you out a little bit. There's two types of steps we can put in. We can refer to a GitHub action for that wonderful marketplace of actions we talked about, or we can do a run step. A run step just runs the script within the runner or the within the agent that we're running our workflow in. So I'm just going to do a really simple run step. Just run a really simple script. I just want to check the version of Node or npm. So let's do that. We are going to say Node version, and then I'm going to do another run step, npm version. So let's walk through what we have so far. When we push a commit to our repository, we have a list of jobs that are going to run. This job is called first job, and it has a list of steps. It's two steps that run a script. The first step runs a script that runs node version. The second step runs a script that runs npm version. Save it. I believe my last one's step D, so I'll call this step E. I'm just doing this to keep things straight in my mind. Sync my changes up. And then I will go to my actions. Make sure I didn't have anything missing. Oh no, it says I have to tell it what my workflow is going to run on. Well, I need to tell it which operating system I'm going to run everything on. So it runs on, we're going to run it on Windows and the latest version of Windows that's available. Step F, send that up. And hopefully I got everything this time, right? We go in, we go to actions. Oh, yellow, that means we finally got everything, right? So we're running on Windows latest, waiting for a runner to pick up job. Yellow means that my workflow file was valid. It's finally got a valid workflow. It set up the job for the operating system, Windows Server 2022 at the time of this recording. So that was the Windows latest. It ran node version, which is 16.14.0, ran npm version 8.3.1, and then it completed the job. So we have a successful workflow run. Now, I showed you how to build it out manually like that because I wanted you to see, like, this is pretty much the minimum to run a workflow. And I wanted you to see through trial and error how you can build out a workflow so that you can understand kind of the really basics of the syntax. And now, knowing that, we can actually just jump back into the slide deck and I could walk you through some of those things I just showed you. So when we're configuring our workflow environment, essentially we're configuring some basic keywords, right? We have our own keyword, and that specifies the event that's triggering, whether it's a pull request that's triggering this workflow, a push that's triggering this workflow, or perhaps both. Now, you can do it on anything, or you can filter it to a specific branch or maybe a release tag. You can also specify other configuration options. Like, for example, you can optionally configure an environment some settings. So, like, if you need an environment variable as part of this workflow, if you need a specific environment variable as part of your build. The other thing that you saw that's super interesting here is that you saw runs on. Now, we were using GitHub hosted runners, but you can have self hosted runners. But for the GitHub hosted runners, that allows you to specify an operating system. So we use Windows latest, but you can use more specific operating systems like macOS 11, Windows 2019, Ubuntu latest, or Ubuntu 20.04. There's another one that you didn't see me use yet. We'll use in a second. A container that allows you to not only specify the GitHub hosted runner, but specify a Docker container that the actual build steps were run within. So this is really useful if you need to drill down your build environment even further. So for example, I may be using the Ubuntu based um, GitHub hosted runner, but I need a very specific version of Node for my build. So I want to show that very specifically. So just jumping right back into my examples, we have Windows latest as our environment. I'm going to switch from Windows latest to Ubuntu latest. I'm going to show you something really cool. So the last build we did was step F. So we're going to just call this step G. I'm going to see how much of the alphabet we can get to, right? Step G, and sync our changes up. And from here, we're going to, there we go to our latest workflow run. And there's our first job. It's kicking off. It's requesting a runner that has the label Ubuntu latest. So for the operating systems, Ubuntu 20.04. Now, one of the cool things, if you go to virtual environment, it actually has a hyperlink to the GitHub page that'll tell you of what's installed on this machine. So Node 16.14.0 is installed on this machine. And if we go down here, we'll see when we ran Node version that matches up with what was installed on the software list. But I mean, that's nice and all, but GitHub manages that version of Node. And so if I'm building an application, my organization might be using a different version of Node. We may be further ahead or we may be behind that version. That could be problematic for us. And so how do we control that? Well, we can rely on the power of Docker here. So you remember earlier I showed you that you can actually use a container setting. So just going into Docker hub.docker.com, I can search for the node container image and just selecting node here. And I can see that there's tags for node container image. And just looking at, let's say the latest, right? We have 17.6.0. Okay, that's interesting. Let's use that, right? So I can go in and see that 16.14.0 is what the official GitHub runner is using. But if I go in under run zone and add another setting container, and I say node 17.6.0, oh, not 8, 17.6.0, I'm going to call this, I think I'm up to H now, step H. Commit that, sync it up. Now go back to my GitHub action. Now I have, while I'm still running on a GitHub hosted agent, it's initializing a container within that agent. So it's actually pulling that container down. It's going to run that container in Docker. So the agent is still being used, the GitHub hosted agent, but it's running a container within the agent. And then my build, my workflow is running within the container. So if we run node version, we get 17.6.0. We run npm version, we get a different version of npm. We could do it both with a newer version and an older version. Just to illustrate that, I'm going to instead of node 17, let's say our application is running on node 14. That's perfectly fine. Step I is us downgrading to node 14. Commit that, sync it up. And just illustrating that, we'll just go in, go to GitHub Actions, check that out. I made it click too fast. Sometimes you get excited and you click fast. And again, if you got any questions, please feel free to throw them in the chat. For those who just joined, our slides and source code, our own GitHub, github.com, msusdev, end-to-end CI/CD. Every single workflow I've just put in, all the YAML, all the slide notes, everything is here, including links to future YouTube sessions, notes, everything that I'm showing you here is on GitHub. So please feel free to check out our show notes. Ask questions in the chat. We are here to help. We also, if you have questions after this, after we're done live streaming, msusdev at microsoft.com. All right, so running node version 14.19.0 and a much older version of npm. So, you know, it's super opinionated here, but I'm one of those people that when I'm on a client site, I almost never run builds natively on a build agent. I almost exclusively run my builds on Docker container images because I can run a build in a pristine environment in the end. On my dev boxes, we're running them within Visual Studio Code remote containers. On my build agents, we're running them within a built container within either GitHub Actions or another service that supports running containers for builds. And then in production, we're running it in a container service like Azure Container Instances or Azure Kubernetes Services. So containers all the way down, right? It's super fascinating stuff. So really fun stuff. One more thing I want to show you, and then just gonna talk a little bit more about GitHub Actions. We are we've done a lot of cool stuff with this workflow so far. But this, as you can see, I'm relying on my ability to understand how this workflow works from previous experience, but it's not well documented. Oh, one of the things I could do to make everybody's life easier is to add descriptors and labels. So within GitHub Actions, I can add things like names. So here, I can say this is a node continuous integration, and I hope I'm spelling continuous correctly. No continuous integration is the name of this workflow. The name of this job, first job, I'll just call it name build node. I can even rename it to build node. And that's just the identifier. If I'm referencing this job somewhere else, I can reference it as build node, but the display name is build node. Um, that works just fine. I'll save this and I'll call this step J. Commit it, sync the changes up, and you'll see there's no fundamental change to the build, but you'll see that if I go to actions, you'll see that the label here has changed, no continuous integration. And you'll see now it says build node instead of the identifier. That's great. And it still runs everything just fine. Run node version, run npm version takes a little bit longer, but I just changed the labels just to make it a little bit easier to parse, a little bit easier to read. Fun stuff. Let's talk a little bit about our code because all I've done now is just check the build environment. But what good is a workflow for not actually building code, right? So I'm going to just jump in, and one of the first things we do when we're building node code is we run npm install. So I don't really have a project here, so just close this. I'm going to add some code. So I'm going to add a package.json file. I'm going to call this. I'm going to just keep it simple. I'm going to call this. You know what? Simple. App.js. I know this is controversial, but when I'm doing demos, I add the package lock at JSON file to the git ignore. I don't do that with an actual production project. And I add the node modules folder, of course, to the git ignore. And then I will add a app.js file and then console.log hello world. Again, just really simple demo. Let's go to Windows Terminal, npm install. I don't think I put any packages in here, so this is going to do nothing. Node app.js was a reflex, so this is as simple as a project gets, right? The reality here, though, is that I have a very basic project. Maybe I will npm install save I don't know, moment. So I have a package in here. So we have moment package in here. Wonderful. We have our application and we will commit this. So my I was going to get ready to call this my first project, but let's stay with the steps. This is step K. And what I will do is I will add a step to my workflow to run npm install. Now, I know what's going to happen here, but I just want you to see this. What happens? One of the core concepts when you're working with code with GitHub Actions is this concept of where your code actually exists in the build agent. So we have our build node here. We're initializing a container. We're checking the version of node. Nothing's crazy yet, right? We're running npm version. Now we run npm install. Something weird is going to happen. Or weird if you've never worked with this platform before. So npm installs kick it up. And I just want you to see this. It's thinking. There we go. So npm install, which closed right away, is about to highlight it, cannot find a package.json file. See, when we're working with code within any type of workflow, the code isn't there in the build agent by default. We actually have to pull the code down. So we have to actually go and retrieve the code. And we can actually write logic to go and do that. But why would we reinvent the wheel when somebody from GitHub has already implemented that? And that chain of thought is true for a lot of things. And that's where GitHub Actions really shines. There's a lot of things, common things that you're going to want to do within GitHub Actions has already been implemented in really smart ways elsewhere. And that's where the marketplace of actions really shines. And that's what we're going to talk about next, is that wonderful marketplace of actions. So let's actually dig into that a little bit. That's the GitHub marketplace. See, anybody can create a action. They're essentially any repository that has logic that you can use within a workflow. It could be something you can use within a workflow for free, which is the majority of them, or it could be one you can actually sell to other services. The way they're referenced is just using, like you were referencing the other repo, the org name and repo name. So just using it as an example here, we are going to go to github.com/marketplace. You'll see the whole GitHub marketplace, but if we go to actions, you'll see many different types of actions available here. So just as an example, we're going to dig into um, a couple, like just a couple example actions I want you to check out. So the first example action I want to talk about is the checkout action. It's in the actions organization in the checkout repository. It's at version v2 right now. So let's check that one out. So if you go here, you can just type in checkout. It'll take you to the home page for the checkouts action. It has a description of it. You can also go to the repository itself. And just like I said, it's an actions organization/checkout repository. And you can use this in your project. It has a usage page that tells you how to use it. This is the only required thing. Uses actions checkout. It does exactly what you think it does. It checks out the code from GitHub for you to use in your build agent. I wish I could say it was more complicated than that, but that's all you need to do to pull the code into your build agent. Let's talk through another one. So, well, actually, before I talk through another one, I forgot. Let's talk about using these in your workflow. So, remember, I told you earlier that when you have a workflow, you can do two things. You can run a script or you can use an action. Well, to use an action, instead of using run in a step, you use uses. So, with action, the syntax is uses, and then it uses the organization name/repo name and then a version number. Now, if that action has any configuration settings, you have to use the with um, keyword, and then any configuration settings you need to set. So for example, if you want to check out code, you would say uses action/checkout. We're going to look at that one a little bit deeper. Uh, Another example I always like to pull out, because we're going to use this one in the second session in the series pretty deeply, is the upload artifact action. It's one of my favorites. If you have multiple jobs, multiple stages, you can actually upload build artifacts. So let's say you create a package in one place and you want to upload that package to a service somewhere else. You can actually do that using the upload build artifact. That's really great. So let's say you have a pull request and you build a build artifact and you want somebody to be able to validate that build artifact offline. This action is really amazing for that. I use this um, constantly. You're actually going to see this one, because if you go to and I'm going to post this on a video again. If you go to our repo where we have the slide decks, I use this action in the workflow to build the slide decks for this presentation, because I actually built the PowerPoint files and I used the upload artifact um action to upload the PowerPoint files for these presentations, and then I use the GitHub release action to download the artifacts and then release them. So it's a pretty amazing action. And this one does require you to specify some properties. So just showing just a different twist on it, in case you're interested in that. So, without further ado, I just wanted to show another demo, another way of getting at things. So, we're going right back to Visual Studio Code. We have our code, and what I'm going to do here is we are going to just jump in, and we are going to remove this npm install. We're going to check out our code. So, action. So instead of run, we're going to use actions checkout version 2. And then just for fun, we're going to run dir to see what it pulls down. Now, my expectation is going to pull down the package JSON file, the app.js file, and the getignore file. That's my assumption. So if I get this right, this should be step L. So commit this, sync it up. And again, if you got any questions, just jump in on the chat. We're more than happy to answer any questions you got. So just jumping into the actions, step L. And if you're watching this video as a recording, msusdev at Microsoft.com and slides and source code are available on GitHub. All right. Project is building. We're checking node version, checking npm version, checking out the code. That was fast. It ran dir. There's the app.js and package.json file. All right. So it did check out our code successfully. So you get that part right. So if I remove dir and just run npm install, this should be step M. It should run npm install correctly. And I should just be able to go for there, and it should pull down my moment package, right? So sync my changes up. Go into actions, go to step M, click through. Checking out the code, running npm install. It pulled down the moment package. I just want to show it did pull down the moment package. Wonderful. Great. And I should just be able to add a node app.js just to run it. That's step in. Commit that. Sync the changes up. And the reason I'm just doing so many extra steps, because I just want to show you how you could just do this so fast and so iteratively. That way you could teach yourself GitHub Actions. This isn't something that's like monolithic where you need like, thousands of man hours to or woman hours to learn how to do this. You could just teach yourself this at any time. It's easy, it's quick. You could just jump in. There's our hello world. that was you saw it's been what 40 minutes since we went live. I went from a blank page to having a complete CI pipeline for a node application running. I mean, we can make this application fancier. We can add a documentation for all of these steps. So I can add labeling. Let's see, check node version, check npm version, check out code, install npm packages. And I'm just looking to the side because I want to make sure whatever I type here matches up with my show notes, so that if you're looking at the GitHub repo later, you will always see the same exact thing. That way, you're not saying, "Hey, you told me that we had all the notes available." Our date equals moment dot format using the LL format, which I can't type today. Console.log date. I'm just showing you how I can add code, change the formatting, the workflow. I'm gonna call this one final step. Just jump in, sync these final changes up. And Matt just let me know that we still have the overlay. That's Matt. This is the final step in the presentation. So this is just kind of doing that on purpose, just in case anybody wants to go to the GitHub repo to see where the code is for this. There's a final build, just showing that we had these really cool labels on this workflow. We're checking node version, checking npm version, checking our code, installing our npm packages, running our applications, push checkout, all this really cool stuff. Um, we basically went from nothing to everything really fast. Just to show you guys some really cool stuff, I have the URL for our GitHub repo already up on the side, github.com/msusdev and ncicd. If you go to our GitHub repo, you'll see our introduction to GitHub Actions. We have our presentation content here. You can see all the slides I've shown you today. You can see the show notes, every single YAML file I've showed you. All of our slides are markdown format, so you can just read it at your own pace. You don't have to download the PowerPoint files, especially if you're not running on a Windows machine or anything like that. Please feel free to go through our show notes, do this at your own pace. I'm about to show you some hyperlinks and stuff. All of them are clickable here. So just very open, easy to parse show notes. I'm going to just jump back in to our slides. We could just review real quick. So we talked about GitHub Actions. We talked about the YAML syntax. We talked about building projects. Just want to remind everybody that, hey, all of this stuff is on GitHub. We covered a lot today. This is the very basic fundamentals that you need if you're going to be working with GitHub Actions. And everything we do in the second and third session is going to be built on top of this. So please feel free to come back through this video, run through it multiple times as we go deeper into continuous integration, continuous deployment, because everything we do in CI and CD is going to be built upon the basic fundamentals we covered here. The beautiful part about this is that there's a lot of hyperlinks that I started right kind of digging into. So the GitHub documentations on the YAML workflows covers a lot of the same things I showed here. You saw me go to Docker Hub and go to the node page. The GitHub Actions page, which talks about the checkout action. I talked about a lot of the same things there. I also encourage you, if I didn't answer your questions, if I didn't really get to what you were talking about today, msusdev at Microsoft.com, please feel free to shoot us a question there. And then one more thing I want to point out to you, there's a really great Microsoft Learning Path about automating your workflow with GitHub Actions that covers a lot of the same material. So if you want to get hands-on and try this out yourself, please go to Microsoft Learn, try this out yourself, get hands-on. And again, if you got questions, msusdev at Microsoft.com, please hit us up there. Please join us. We have another session coming up, same time, same day next week, where we're going to go into continuous integration using JavaScript and GitHub Actions. And if you're more interested in .NET and Azure pipelines, we'll be on next Tuesday talking about Azure pipelines and .NET. So we will see you all next week, wherever you want to talk about Azure pipelines, GitHub Actions, .NET, or JavaScript. So we will see you all then.